Hey there, everyone. I'm James Daniels. You can find me on Twitter on James Uriah. And I'm a developer programs engineer at Google, and I work on the Firebase team. Well, you may know me from such great hits as ng-conf 2019 and ng-conf 2018. I've been talking about Firebase and AngularFire for a little bit now, one of the most common speakers for the team. But today, let's just loop back, cover a little bit of ground on what Firebase is, what problems we're trying to solve, and then I'll walk you through some of the things that we've been doing lately. So Firebase is Google's application development platform, right? We are the tools made for you to develop an application quickly, to get to market faster, and build better applications. Ultimately, our mission is to help app developers succeed, right? We want you shipping those cool applications, and we want to increase that time to market. 2 million apps use us. I don't know which one of these, if any of them are using Angular. These are the ones that I'll approve to be on this slide, but 2 million apps are using us right now. And I'm sure some of these people are using Angular behind the scenes. So the problems that we solve, right, is really focused on the developer cycle, the development cycle. So it's first, you develop your application, right? You need authentication, you need to store data, you need to have computing, you need to respond to events, and you need to test your applications. We have a bunch of tools around this first part of the cycle to develop. And especially Angular developers and people who have used Firebase on the web, these are the tools that you are most familiar with. Now, Firebase has a lot more tools, right? So we have tools around running your application, release management, analytics, and crash reporting. And we also have tools around engaging. We have cloud messaging, personalization, and experimentation. So ultimately, we have tools around this entire app lifecycle. And we're supported on multiple platforms, right? iOS, Android, web, C++, and Unity. Of course, everyone here, right? Presumably you're Angular developers, at least mostly. So you're very much focused on this web piece. And as I touched on before, in the past, a lot of our tools were geared towards solving the problems for iOS and Android developers. Web, we had, a lot of tools back from the startup days, but not much in the terms of new development since the acquisition by Google. But all of that's changed, right? So since I spoke at last ng-conf, Firebase has been launching a lot of its features for the web, right? We have remote configuration, we have the Google Analytics integration, performance monitoring, we now have emulators for a lot of our tools, and much, much more. And really key to this, right, was this Google Analytics piece. We rely for performance monitoring, remote config, and a lot of our features on this Google Analytics piece. And finally, Google Analytics for Firebase for web is now a thing, which has really unblocked us and bringing a lot more of our platform to web developers. So how does this affect you, and how does this affect me beyond, my being an employee of Google? I'm also the maintainer of AngularFire, right? So announcing today, we just released the first 6.0 stable version of AngularFire, where we support Angular 9, Ivy, and some of the cool new stuff that I'll touch on. But you can find us on GitHub here, GitHub AngularFire. And that's where most of you are going to be familiar with me, right? I'm the AngularFire maintainer. And AngularFire is extensions to the JS SDK. We wrap it, adding more Angular features, right? The Firebase JS SDK is meant for any platform. It's agnostic. And ultimately, AngularFire's job is to make the Firebase JS SDK a little bit more seamless in Angular. I'll jump in on some code and show you around a little bit in a few minutes. But what I really want to talk about today is how we can use the deep Google Analytics integration with the Angular router. This is a new feature of AngularFire. I want to show you how you can alter the behavior of your application without having to redeploy your application. application with Firebase remote configuration, right? We're going to show off universal deployment schematics, and I'm going to touch on how we're achieving some of our new lightweight lazy loaded modules. So let's go ahead and jump into the code. And of course, this comes with the standard caveat of I'm going to be live coding. So things happen, right? But let's pray to the demo gods that things are going well. So let's go ahead and jump over. So here I just have a very, very simple shell application running on localhost. Very simple. I've actually spun it up here. So this yarn startup would have helped if I got that going before talking, but you know, it's going to do its thing. And showing off the code base, I have my app module. I brought in a couple things already from AngularFire just to save a little bit of time. But this is the main thing, right? I brought in the AngularFire module. I initialized the application with our Firebase credentials. Let's go ahead and see if that's now running. Let's reload this. All right, looks good. I brought in a couple other things. This is the sample application I used to work on AngularFire. I have a test of the database of Firestore, and I've left remote configuration blank. So I will add analytics to this, and then we'll play around with the remote config. So adding analytics, I first brought in the AngularFire analytics module, right? This is going to be the AngularFire wrapper for interacting with Firebase analytics. We now have a number of services. So namely, the screen tracking service. By simply including AngularFire module, initializing, bringing in AngularFire analytics, and now the screen tracking service, our application will lazy load gtag, and it will hook into the Angular router, listen to the events, and start transmitting those back to Firebase. We also have a user tracking service. So if you're using Firebase authentication, whenever a user logs in, it'll actually start logging their UUID into Google Analytics. So reload that. There we go. And now let's show you a little bit what the analytics experience looks like. So since it takes a while to stream the data in, I actually grabbed one of my other applications that has had data streaming in here for a while. This is on Snapshot. This is the application I built for the code labs at last ng-conf. And I actually updated it and brought in these new modules. So here's the Google Analytics experience that we see here. We actually have a number of events. We have users logging into the system. And we can filter on some of the parameters here. And of course, the console throws. There we go. We can actually see I'm automatically logging the primary outlet here. So I'm actually outlet tracking. So if you have multiple outlets on the page, when you render things in them, you'll actually get those transmitted. And you can actually see the screen class as well as the screen name getting transmitted. So you can see this is actually based off the route name. And this is actually the module getting loaded into the route. So you can see where your usage is. There's a lot of really cool data in here. And you can filter down on things, right? You can filter by platform, audiences, stuff like that. But this really isn't a Google Analytics lesson. I just wanted to show you that by just adding those modules, we're getting some really cool integrations with the Angular router here. And it's developed in such a way, too, that when you're in production mode, you're still going to get really good naming and stuff like that. Whereas, that's a hard problem because when you deploy to production mode, things get mangled a lot. So we also have performance monitoring. So by simply bringing in AngularFire performance module, we then get statistics on our performance of our application. So we're going to get all network requests logged by default, first contentful paint, stuff like that. So we can actually dive in on traces. I can see that, localhost is performing a little bit faster than the production site. So I should probably figure out why that is. And then I have a number of traces, and I'll touch on traces in a second and show you how to put a trace into remote configuration. Finally, I can look at the network tab. I can see all the APIs getting called. By default, it's based off domain name. I can actually create custom URL patterns to look at that further. But I can go ahead and jump in, look at how often, Google Tag Manager, how quickly the response time is, payloads, stuff like that. And great thing about all this data is if there's something here in the console that we don't provide for you, all of this, you can pipe it all to BigQuery and do more advanced querying. So that's that console experience. Now let's look at remote configuration. So remote configuration is a highly scalable service for basically delivering JSON payloads with variants to clients, right? So I have Yo here, what? I can update that. I can add more parameters. Right, and the idea here is this is configuration, where I could say background color, right? And I could consume this somewhere in my application. I could then put variants on this, right? I could, vary it by country, region. I could vary it by audiences, which is a Google Analytics audience, and a lot of other powerful things. Let's go ahead and publish these changes. Let's go ahead and play around with the remote config. So here I have a module, just remote config module, since I'm playing around with it. And I brought in AngularFire remote config via dependency injection. And this is one of the best things that AngularFire gives you, is it's going to actually have dependency injection. Things are going to work a lot better in an Angular sense. So I can go here and I can go remote config .changes, and I can async type that, and I can do JSON. Because remote config changes, if you see the autocomplete here, is actually an observable of remote config parameters. So now when I save that and go back to my application, I can actually see we have this here. We're actually fetching the value what, key yo, what time it fetched. I refresh it, we got that. Now, you notice I refresh the page and I'm not getting new values, right? This is a highly scalable service and actually has a lot of caching. If you bear with me for a second, I'm going to reset all of this. And I fast forward in time a little bit. Here I'm actually constructing a new observable and I'm actually tracing it. So now I'll actually be able to tell how quick it takes to get a response back from the server. And then further, what I've done in my app module is I jumped ahead a little bit and added a little bit more configuration, right? These are all the dependency injection tokens from AngularFire. And these allow me to configure things, namely remote config, right? I can actually tell it that if I'm in dev mode, reduce the caching time. And that's going to make it so that, I can see those much, much faster in local development. And then let, our production version be more scalable. So now when I refresh this, I might have to restart. We should now see new changes. This is one of those live demo risks, right? Well, that didn't work. Let's move on. So let's jump over this. Sorry, back here. So one of the things that I've actually done here is this is up on the web. I'm actually hosting this on Firebase. And there's a little trick here. If I actually go and I curl this, you can actually see that it has a bunch of data on it. The image is there. We actually have our database content. So this is actually hosted on Cloud Functions, Google Cloud Functions, and Firebase hosting. And this is using our new deploy script. So now when we do ng-deploy, this will actually, if it's an Angular universal application, spin up the resources on Cloud Functions as well. And we also have a cool option of ng-deploy preview, where it'll actually spin up the local emulators. So you can actually see the application that you're about to deploy before you deploy it. Yeah, so that's a little bit of what's new. Let me jump back to the slides here. So I mentioned the lightweight lazy loaded modules. It didn't seem like I had to juggle much, right? Basically, we handle the lazy loading of the Firebase JS SDK behind the scenes. If you used the Firebase JS SDK before, one of its problems is that it's a rather large kind of legacy styled library. This is one of the things that we're working on, right? We're working to make it more modular and more tree shakeable, but it's sort of in that prototypical inheritance pattern. So when you pull in, say, authentication, you're getting all the different sign-in methods. So to make a better experience for your end users, we're actually lazy loading that. So we're using 3 technologies to really achieve this. First and foremost, we're doing dynamic importing of those SDKs. We're then isolating the side effects by running that outside of the Angular zone. And then we have an ES proxy, which then handles all the promises and the promise chains, and will actually jump back into the Angular zone when there's something to inform the user about. So I'll actually show you a little bit of a simplified version of the proxy itself. So first, we're creating an ES proxy, and we have this get, which is going to allow us to get properties or functions off of it. So first, we jump outside the Angular zone. Then I take whatever SDK we're dynamically importing, and I actually look to see if it has a property that we're asking for already on the SDK. So this would be something like, .then or, .catch, something around promises or that dynamic import. So if you just want to get it as a promise and you call .then or you call await, then this here will just return the SDK import as a promise. Next, at the very bottom, we have this proxy object. So here we're proxying just an empty function because we already have the SDK import. So the empty function allows us to get the apply method. So again, if there's a get and there's a property on there, say it's then, say it's catch, toString, what be it, and it's already on the promise, just return it. Otherwise, we're going to use apply. And we get apply because we're passing it a function. And that is going to be any function call, right? So if it's a function call on the SDK, say you're dynamically importing Firebase auth, and then you call auth.signin, then what we're going to do is jump onto that promise. We're going to resolve the promise, and then we're going to take whatever property you asked for or function, and then once the promise resolves, return its args. And what this effectively does for us is all the SDK methods are now promisified, and all of the dynamic importing is hidden away from the user. The real magic here is that promise, right? So we take an observable of the SDK import, we turn it to a promise. And then if it's a function, we just bind it and return it. If it's a promise, then what we do is we resolve it. Then we jump back into the zone and run it. And if it's just a property, we jump back into the Angular zone and just return that property. So this little proxy, it's very confusing. It took me a while to get this right. But ES proxies are really powerful, have a lot of footguns too. But basically what I've done here is taking the dynamic import and hiding it away from you, the developer. You don't have to worry about any of it. So how does this look, right, consuming this? So this is how it looks. You just import AngularFire authentication, and we have an async login function that just calls this auth sign in with pop-up. And we have a logout, this auth sign out. If it was already a promise, it's still a promise, right? So it makes the API so that you don't have to worry about any of this lazy loading, how things are loading behind the scenes, any of that. And whenever you call one of those methods, it's going to start importing that SDK. So it is really, truly lazy. The same goes with performance monitoring and analytics, right? So you're not actually going to have the analytics library interfering with your time to first paint or your zone stability. That's going to go off to the side. And once that's loaded, it's going to start sending data to Google Analytics. But now Google Analytics is completely asynchronous and off of that critical path. So I want to give some shoutouts to a couple of things that I didn't have much time to talk about. The new version of TypeScript gave us a lot of these capabilities. We're now using ng-packager, which is solving our Angular package format stuff for us. It's really great. I don't have to have a very, very complicated build script. And we have provided in any. What is provided in any? So basically, this is an isolated service for every injector. So whenever you pull in one of the Firebase SDKs, it's isolated from the rest, and you don't have to worry about conflicts. This is allowing for a cleaner separation of concerns between modules and SDKs. For us personally, the thing that it really brings to the table is, say you're using Google Analytics or performance monitoring, and you're an SDK or you're an NPM module. This is a common thing. This really makes multi-tenancy in AngularFire a lot cleaner. If you want to learn more about provided in any, Christian Kohler actually has a really good article on this. I'd recommend checking it out. Goes into great detail and compares it to the other types of dependency injection. Just recently, the Firebase console also migrated to Angular 9, so huge shout out to the Angular team. We're benefiting from lazy loading, some great improvements there. And yeah, the console's a little big, the packages are a little big, but there's a lot more work to do to slim things down. But we're confident that we can do that work now that we're on Angular, and that team has our back and is giving us the great tools that we need to really increase the performance of the console. And finally, huge shout out to the Angular community, right? And the AngularFire community. We have a lot of awesome contributors. I think we're at 120 contributors now for AngularFire. And, everyone in that community makes my life a lot easier, right? So, if you're interested in these new capabilities, go ahead and ng-add AngularFire. That'll prompt you through, set things up. If you're a universal application, it'll give you those deployment schematics and, some really cool things. Thank you very much. It was great chatting with you today. I wish that we were all in Salt Lake City and I could, interact with people face to face. I could, go grab drinks with some of our contributors. But unfortunately, it's stressful times, and hopefully everyone here is healthy and, has stable jobs and is going to weather this storm. But thanks for having me.